So as of a couple minutes ago, we were up to 200 and almost 250 registrants. So super awesome. And thank you everybody for jumping on. A couple disclaimers up front. Number one, much like many of you working from home right now, I cannot guarantee that there won't be a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old that run in during this session at some point. So we'll do our best to avoid that, but it may happen. Secondly, like many of you, let's just put it on the table. I am wearing sweatpants right now underneath my collared shirt. So this is the new normal for at least the foreseeable future. And as a result of that, we actually wanted to take a big step back with this webinar because we know that a lot of people are sitting at home. Everyone's staying busy, but there also are periods of downtime and you're looking for something to do other than read news about coronavirus. So we wanted to take a huge step back and really during this pause in the world, take a minute to educate a lot of you guys that do have questions, whether you're a first timer to virtual reality, immersive learning, augmented reality, or whether you've been doing this for a while. We know that there are still a lot of questions that continue to be on people's minds every day. So the number one goal of the next hour is education. We did ask for some questions ahead of time, just in case. We got a lot. We'll also do our best to field any of the live questions that come up. But the goal of this is to make it as organic as possible. I have a few slides to kick us off from a thought leadership standpoint, just to kind of set the stage. But other than that, this is planned on being very unscripted. I have a few supporting slides to help illustrate some things that we kind of always use when we're meeting with folks. But for the most part, this is going to be very organic and very, very unscripted. So to start off, I just want to provide a little bit of background and credibility here. Why you should listen to Stryver for some of our answers to these things that you guys want to know. For those of you that don't know us, really quickly, our background actually comes from the sports world. I went to Stanford as an undergrad. I played football there. I went and worked and consulted for a couple of years, went to business school at USC. And then I had this crazy thought that if I didn't see coaching before I turned 30, I would regret it forever. So I went back to Stanford to coach during the 2013 and 2014 seasons. I was a graduate assistant, so I had to do a master's. And my master's thesis was to come up with a way to train football players using virtual reality. It was such a successful academic project that the head coach of Stanford, David Shaw, literally sat me down and kicked me out of the office and said, if I were you, I would get out of here and go start a company because this is too good and you're probably 1 to 2 years ahead of everybody else. So that's what I decided to do. And for the first 18 months, Stryver was mainly working with NFL and college football teams. And then in the summer of 2016, we got a pretty fortuitous phone call from Walmart. And they said, hey, we've seen what you've done in sports. Can you come down here and show us what we could do for employee training? And that set us on a much different path to where Stryver is today, which is we're still doing sports, but we are largely an enterprise software play, having scaled the hardware you needed to use VR and the software needed to pull it off, which we'll talk about a little later, to a lot of Fortune 500 organizations around the country. So before jumping into the questions, wanted to start by just letting everyone know our reason for existence and honestly, forget Stryver, why this technology matters. So a lot of you that are on this session right now are probably from the L&D space, the HR space, and this image is something that we are all too familiar with in this world. And not to say that every organization has training that leads to this image here, but this is a real thing. Due to the ubiquity of screens in the world, cell phones, tablets, computers, etc., training has been downgraded a bit to where we can scale training everywhere, but the end result is unfortunately this. It's often uninteresting, it's often boring, the information goes in one ear and out the other. Usually someone sits in front of a computer and thinks to themselves, how fast can I get through this? And really, to be honest, the system is pretty broken. So virtual reality allows for the chance to disrupt this massive industry and bring a new piece of technology to the world that will lead to better training outcomes, more ROI, etc. So now let's also talk about the world in which we are playing. And what we've chose to do at Stryver is we've chose to break this down into 3 very basic buckets. So on average, this is how companies approach employee development. You hire people, you train them, and then they do the work. Now, we know that that is not necessarily the norm, and some companies have their own version of this. They have nuances, but again, on average, hire, train, do is a fairly consistent and repeatable formula for an organization of any size, from 5 people to 500,000 people. Furthermore, VR and AR will be highly impactful over the next decade in these buckets. And our perspective at Stryver is that virtual reality will be complementary, supplementary, all out disruptive eventually in the hiring bucket and the training bucket, and augmented reality will be the doing technology. And the reason is this. So first off, I want to do a quick 45-second segue on VR versus AR. I'm going to assume that you know nothing for the next 45 to 60 seconds, just to make sure we're all on the same page, and I'm going to make this stupid simple. Virtual reality is complete mental transportation. I put a headset on, my body is in one place, my brain thinks I am somewhere else. Augmented reality is exactly what it sounds like, augmenting the real world around you. Both of these technologies have actually been around for a long time in more crude forms. VR has been around in the military community and the medical community for decades. AR has been around. Your car windshield is a form of AR, back to some of those Cadillacs from the 80s and 90s that had the miles per hour that flashed up on your windshield when you were driving. So both of these have been around for a while. We're just now in the cheaper, lighter, faster, more modern era of these technologies. So with this as a background, just to make sure we're all on the same page, how should you think about VR and why VR will impact employee development? The analogy is pretty simple. This is a flight simulator. It's been around for 50 years. And the reason why pilots keep using them for training is because they work. Ostensibly, when a pilot goes inside a flight simulator, he or she is flying the plane without actually flying the plane. If you mess up, you won't kill anybody, you won't crash a $100 million asset, and you keep practicing again and again and again until you have proven that you can fly the plane effectively. Augmented reality is this movie. A lot of us have probably seen the movie Minority Report. This is where AR wants the world to go. Full disclosure, probably a little scary, but whether it's a contact lens, your eyeball, a pair of glasses, again, AR is augmenting the real world around you, giving you stimuli and overlays, etc. So now, coming back to this, VR for hiring and training. Why? Virtual reality will be impactful in hiring due to the notion, like the flight simulator, that we can achieve simulation-based assessment of employees, whether that's a new hire, a promotee, somebody changing jobs. Can we put you through simulations to figure out if you actually know what you're gonna do when you go do that job, or to assess you, much like the Myers-Briggs, the DISC assessment, some of these personality and other assessments that have sought to unearth certain characteristics about people over the years. Virtual reality also, due to the flight simulator analogy, will impact training, simulation-based learning via virtual reality. Learning by doing is more effective than staring at the computer and watching the video or the PowerPoint and having information go in one ear and out the other. And then lastly, augmented reality, that image of Minority Report being the future of the industry, will be the doing technology. So I'm a factory worker at BMW. The cars are going by me on the assembly line, and the glasses are literally telling me what to do so I don't make a mistake, right? So that is our vision for where this world is going. And then Stryver specifically, but really as you guys are thinking through this in your own organization, as you're evaluating vendors, et cetera, our goal at Stryver is to be the software glue that is tying all of this together. We got a lot of questions about our patent and our fundraise, which I'll get to in a second, but just know that one day these devices will be everywhere in places of work, and we want to be the software glue that is tying it all together, talking to each other, ultimately leading to our vision for predictive and actionable insights, where you can put somebody in a headset and you can know with near certainty how they're going to perform in the real world, something which currently is not afforded to us as it relates to how we hire, train, and ultimately do the work. So with that, I'm going to stop. That is the overall thought leadership, just putting us all in the right frame of mind for how we think about where this world is going with respect to VR and AR. We're going to jump into your questions, and I know some folks are already submitting some live questions as well. We will go from there. So first off, we had a couple questions about our announcement last week about our fundraise, the patent that we announced, et cetera. So I just want to knock a few of those off right out of the gate. We had someone ask, what are your plans with this latest investment in Stryver? And then what are 2 KPIs that enabled us to secure such a large investment round? So first off, our immediate investments in Stryver will mainly be on the product and the data science side. So we are building a fairly complex enterprise software platform that allows for the creation of content, the deployment of content and hardware, the management of that content and hardware in the cloud, the playback of content when you put it on your face, and then ultimately the data that we're collecting, pushing that to a dashboard, integrating into your systems of record, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a pretty robust effort. It's not iOS, it's not Android, but it's kind of one layer above. So we're making immediate investments in the product, engineering, and data science part of our business. As far as the KPIs that led to us securing this investment, honestly, we could spend an entire hour on this topic alone. I will say, in full transparency, virtual reality is still in a very nascent world. Investors are still skeptical as to whether or not this is going to be a thing. So one of the things that really helped us was sharing some of our revenue with them, with large corporations, sharing the fact that we have 22,000 headsets deployed out in the field, sharing that we have had 1.6 million sessions in VR across all of our customers so far. So when you start to show some of these metrics that are more than just somebody fooling around with a headset in a dark room, one piece of content at one location for a customer, and they're just kind of playing around with it and having fun. When you start to share some of these, oh my gosh, this is like a real at-scale deployment. When we started to share some of these numbers, that's when people's eyes really started opening, because they were operating from the consumer lens. Okay, how is this doing on the consumer side? Adoption's been just okay, a little worse than maybe we would have thought by now. And then you show them this whole other world of, no, this is a thing in the enterprise, and this is going to continue to be a thing. That was something that was very eye-opening for folks. And I think that's what ultimately led to us being able to raise our round, which is super exciting. One other question on that was, will Stryver move beyond VR training as a beachhead application? Honestly, one day, probably. There's a lot of interesting use cases out there, especially now with the whole work from home movement, maybe being more permanent long-term than people might have thought. So there's virtual meetings from the confines of your own home. There's product development using VR. There's data visualization. There's all these things that ultimately will happen. But I can tell you, for the next 2 or 3 years, probably not something that's going to be on our immediate radar or on our product roadmap. Training is one of the most real, tangible use cases today. It's one of the areas where companies can actually make money today, where everything else is kind of more of a pipe dream, and being able to make money and sustain and grow a business is really important as it relates to the adoption in the space, continuing to expand. So we're going to focus on training for the foreseeable future, but we do get a lot of questions like this, a lot of phone calls, and we're definitely not going to be blind to all of the other things that you can do with this technology. All right, dovetailing off the fundraise, I want to just talk about the patent for a second. So we did have a couple of questions about the patent that we announced, and I want to pick one that I think is the most relevant for today. I don't want to go too deep to the science necessarily, because we actually have a couple other webinars with our Chief Science Officer, Mike Casali, that have already addressed that. Nor do I want to turn this into a peer-reviewed journal empirical discussion for today. I want to kind of keep it high level. So we had a question that specifically said, can you put the patent in layman's terms? And I want to just talk about that, and then we'll move on from the patent. So at the most basic level, you can think about our patent as follows. When people put a headset on, they pretty much look around the virtual world and they make decisions and they do things almost identically to what they would do in real life. And we have proven that time and again, even back to our sports days, when we literally looked at film to see where a quarterback was looking on the field on a certain play. And then we looked at the head tracking data to see where he looked around in VR on that same play. And lo and behold, it was almost a one-to-one correlation. And now that we've kind of shifted more into the enterprise, we're putting data side by side of, okay, where do people look and where do they not look in VR? What are they getting right? What are they getting wrong on questions in VR? And now what's our data telling us from how they're performing in the real world? Where are our mistakes on this assembly line? Where do we lose money? Where do we have safety incidences? And lo and behold, it's pretty scary how accurate it all is. To where, again, back to the flight simulator analogy, when somebody puts the headset on and goes through a learning module in VR, they're almost looking around and making decisions identically to what they would do in the real world. So our patent basically says that we can take an anonymized, so we're very mindful of data privacy and protection. We can take an anonymized data set, an aggregate data set of all the people that went through not only this learning module, but all the other learning modules, and understanding how they look around the virtual world. And we can compare that to how an individual does in a specific session, and we can use that data to predict how that person is going to perform when they get in the real world. Now, obviously, there's a lot of variables that come into this, right? There's head tracking, there's eye tracking, there's reaction time, there's answers to questions right or wrong. There's real world performance data that we want to bring into this that our customers have been super collaborative on with us, which is very exciting. But bottom line, our patent says that Stryver, from a bottoms up processing standpoint, can take all the data that's being collected when somebody's in a headset and can compare that to the masses of data when all these people are in headsets, and use that information to predict how they will do in the real world, or how fast or slow they might churn out in an organization. How successful will they be when they do this job? So that is the layman's version. Basically, think the flight simulator, right? Strivr has patented the ability for its software to be the flight simulator of immersive learning. And that is something that we're really, really excited about. Okay. We got a ton of questions about coronavirus, and I want to actually address one that literally just came in 5 minutes ago live, because I think it's super relevant. How is Stryver ensuring that headsets are properly sanitized between uses, and how is Stryver communicating this to their customers and the world at large? So thank you for that question. So this is an interesting one for us. So first of all, we are doing everything we can to set our customers up for success as it relates to the topic of hygiene and sanitation. So what does that mean? That means giving them all of the research and information that has been done in my co-founder Jeremy Bailenson lab for the last 20 years on this topic. That is testing of different sanitation wipes, looking at some of the more high-end cleaning solutions out there, like the Clean Box, which uses UV rays to disinfect the device. There's a bunch of third-party research that has been done. Some of our customers have done their own research, and they're allowing us to share that. So we are giving as much information as we can to customers as it relates to all of the ways that you should think about hygiene associated with headsets. The other side of this that's interesting for us is we also want to be careful, because we don't work for our customers, and we don't necessarily want to dictate exactly what they're going to do. There are a ton of things that our customers do, from folks that they already do, from medical procedures, medical companies and hospitals, to folks that have large-scale logistics operations, manufacturing, et cetera. A lot of our customers already are doing a lot of things from a sanitation perspective, from the clothes that their employees wear, to the wristbands that they might have when someone looks at a wrist scanner, to the paper that you put down before someone lays down on an operating table, right? There's just a lot of things that they're already are best practices associated with hygiene. And there's some stuff where VR can slot right into that. And there are other areas where you do have to think outside of the box, and you have to come up with something new and different relative to what has been, maybe what's been done in the past or what isn't being done at all. Bottom line, this is something that while we're definitely seeing a little bit of a pause as people reevaluate hygiene, it's not necessarily something that I'm concerned about over the long haul, due to the fact that, as I said before, there are a lot of things that are already happening in the world with hardware and gear and equipment that there already are best practices for sanitation. And we think VR will slide right into that, just like everything else. The other thing we're doing in this regard is we actually do a lot of strategic consulting up front in our sales process, as well as through an engagement and into steady state. And we ask a lot of questions, and we say, okay, how is this going to fit into your training? And there's a difference between 50 people in a room and 5 headsets and everyone passing a headset around. That is a different hygiene and operational challenge than 10 people in a room, a headset for each person, a 1-hour training course using VR, and 5 hours later, the next class comes in and it's 10 people and it's 1 headset per person, right? So when you think about the different ways that organizations approach training, period, and we kind of figure out, okay, how is Stryver going to be used? There are instances where there is a ton of time to do a very thorough cleaning of the headsets using a lot of different methods, relative to the times where people, before COVID-19, were just passing the headset back and forth with one little wipe or no wipe at all, right? So we're really, really leaning in with our customers to make sure that we can figure out what's best for them, also factoring in the research and the science that is going into understanding cleanliness, especially at scale. So I wanted to address that one right up front. That's something that I know is on a lot of people's minds. Please continue to ask questions. Please continue to work with us if you're one of our customers and you're on this. Also, please send in best practices and research, because we're open, to literally everything at this point. Okay, I wanted to take one more on the coronavirus situation. Given the current COVID-19 situation and shelter-in-place orders, do you have plans for developing VR immersive learning solutions that can be utilized by workforces remotely from their homes? So I think this is a super interesting question. It's actually a nice dovetail off of hygiene, because they are kind of linked. So first off, yes, we are thinking about how we can develop at-home training solutions, with virtual reality. However, we also want to make sure that we are focusing on solving business problems. So if there isn't a real business problem to be solved for somebody using a headset in their house, then we don't think it's worth your time and money necessarily, right? So we're going to continue to work with our customers to think through, okay, what is a viable business problem that we're solving, whether it's on-site training, whether it's remote training, whether it's replacing this or that, or whether it's now, okay, I've got 50,000 employees working out of their homes. I don't want them staring at the computer all day. I want them doing 20 minutes of VR, for example. Okay, and why are we doing that? What are we measuring? What's a successful outcome, et cetera? So that's the approach that we're continuing to take. What is the business problem that we are trying to solve with immersive learning? The other thing on this that's super interesting, which is why I wanted to touch on the question as it relates to hygiene, there is a very simple solution to the hygiene problem, and that is everybody has their own headset. And much like we all have computers, much like we all have tablets, much like we all have phones, often these pieces of hardware are now administered to the employee from the employer, either permanently, or then you give it back when it's your time to move on from the organization. We think that we originally thought maybe 5 to 10 years out, a headset on every desk, or every employee gets a headset, just like they get a cell phone when they start working at the organization. Well, that day may be coming sooner than we thought. So maybe this is now a 1 to 2 year thing, where you've got your computer, your tablet, your phone, and your headset as kind of your starter pack for all of the hardware that you're going to need to train, and then ultimately to do your job and beyond. So that's just something that I think is super interesting relative to where we are in the world right now. Okay, let's do one more on COVID, just because it's so top of mind. And I wanted to hit on this one right here. Okay, so where now will virtual reality really make a difference? Specific industries, use cases, hiring, onboarding, soft skills, etc. So we already talked at the beginning about this hire, train, do thing, right? So I think overall, we've kind of already answered at least how we're thinking about this question. Again, VR for hiring, VR for training, AR for doing. The other angle, the other thing to think about here is measuring success and measuring ROI. And to that end, I'm going to skip through some slides that we may get to some other stuff, but I want to hit on something that is super relevant, that comes up in almost every meeting, every conference, every webinar. This is something that everyone wants to know, and I think it's really valuable as we think about virtual reality in a post-COVID world and beyond. So the best ways that we have found our customers to measure the impact of and the ROI associated with immersive learning, VR, AR, et cetera, are really these two buckets right here. Time savings and therefore cost savings, and real world performance improvement. So I want to start with the first bullet. So we have done a lot of A/B testing over the last several years. Our customers have done a lot of A/B testing without us even knowing, which candidly is a little scary because you never know what they're going to get send us back. And I got to be honest with everybody, time and time again, we are finding that, for example, 20 minutes in a headset is an identical or better learning outcome to an hour in front of the computer, or 3 hours in the lecture, or whatever else you may be doing using old school learning methods such as slides, lectures, videos, etc. Bottom line, if you currently have an onboarding program that's 50 hours of training, VR can give you an opportunity to cut it down to 25. Now, VR is not for everything, okay? VR should be part of a blended learning approach for sure. There are things where the lecture is still a great idea. There are things where the PowerPoint and the videos are still a great idea where VR is not a fit. But if you think about this from a blended learning perspective, and okay, I've got this whole bag of tools that I can use to train my people and prepare them, when you think about where VR fits into that and where immersive learning will play in the future, especially in a post-COVID world where we may see some budget tightening in some areas, you need to be thinking about, how can I reduce time but get the same result? Okay, so you guys can all do the math right now. You know where you're spending minutes to hours to days on training, where a learning by doing, a flight simulator-like experience using virtual reality and doing it in a fraction of the time and therefore a fraction of the cost will be the better outcome for you and your organization. So that is something that we continue to hammer with our customers, because it is very, very real. We have seen customers literally throw out a day's worth of training in favor of 20 minutes in a headset where you can just go through that flight simulator-like experience, and you can see the real world impact and also the financial impact on that time savings as a result. The second bullet is real world performance improvement. So this is a trickier one, but it is something that we're starting to see data come in on. Every customer asks about it. Okay, I get it. The flight simulator of learning, VR is going to be great. How can I track if my people are actually going to improve at their jobs? Are they actually going to improve at their jobs? So, full disclosure, this is something that you can't necessarily measure in a month, or maybe even 3 months, or maybe even a year. Some organizations can, and we've been seeing data come back that's very positive in that regard. Others know that it's going to be a 2 or 3 year journey until they can see maybe churn rates go down, operational efficiency go up, et cetera, et cetera. But I can tell you that we are seeing, and by we, I mean Stryver and the industry, other VR immersive learning companies, we are getting the real data and the anecdotal data back that this is working. And as you guys are thinking about a post-COVID world, or even a during COVID world, where I'm gonna need to train people remotely, I can't fly in places, seat time and budgets are gonna be really important. Think through, what are those high impact outcomes where you want VR to really lead to hopefully performance improvement over time? Because we are seeing this work, from I'm 1.5% more efficient with my logistics, which is an X $1 million benefit down the road, to the active shooter simulations that we've been doing with a lot of our customers. And last summer you saw in the news probably Doug McMillon at Walmart come out and say virtual reality training saves some lives in El Paso, right? So that's obviously a very extreme example, but we are seeing that this is working along that spectrum. And I think that's going to be really important as we think about how the workforce is shifting to being more remote, period, over time. Okay, I want to jump into a couple more here. We have a lot to get through. So there are a lot of questions that came in about science, both live right now and some other ones that came in prior to the webinar. So I want to hit on those. So let's start with this one right here. Can you talk about your choice of 360 video versus true VR for training? Okay, I absolutely love this question. Something that comes up again and again and again. And I'm actually going to go back a little bit to a couple slides that we'll use here in a second. So first off, we hear this a lot: 360 video and real VR, true VR. Okay, so I actually am not sure I really like the term real VR as compared for things where you move your hands, body, etc., compared to 360 video. Okay, the reason why we use a lot of 360 video training at the request of our customers is because a lot of the training we're doing is situational awareness type training. And the 360 video environment in situational awareness training is something that we have seen to be much more authentic and much more engaging visually, auditorily, etc. To where when you put someone in that simulation where they're in a Walmart store, they're in a BMW factory, they're on a runway next to an airplane, it's not CG, okay? It's not computer graphics, and their brain therefore says this feels a lot more real than what the computer version feels. And therefore, this heightens their awareness, this heightens their decision-making, it makes it feel more real. And from a science standpoint, their brain is taking the simulation more seriously, and therefore they are hopefully getting a better learning result than if their brain said, man, this just feels like a video game. I'm not really into this right now. Okay, so we have continued to do 360 video training where appropriate based on the authenticity of the experience. And that's something that you guys should be thinking about as you're thinking about your own training, learning modules, etc. Now, let's talk about this real VR thing for a second. That is usually what the industry would call 6 degrees of freedom. So I have a couple very basic slides here, knowing that this might come up. 3 degrees of freedom is when you can only use your head. All you can do is turn left, right, look up, down. If you were to walk forward or back or side to side, you are not going to move in the scene. You're going to be stuck. Okay, so you can look wherever you want, but you can't move in that scene. And usually 360 video training is associated with 3 degrees of freedom training. 6 degrees of freedom, on the other hand, is I can move everything. My head, my hands, my arms, my body. I can walk around. I can pick something up in VR. I can put something on a shelf. I can, use a scalpel with the hand controllers. Okay, so this is why people call 6 degrees of freedom true VR. Now, there are benefits and trade-offs to each of these that I just want to walk through for a second because this is super, super important. So I already talked about the benefits of 3DOF training as it relates to authenticity and visual experience, but there are some trade-offs there. You're not able to physically move. And if you're trying to train on doing a physical task, it might not feel as real. Totally fair. Enter 6 degrees of freedom. What are some of the drawbacks of 6 degrees of freedom? Number one, the visual and mental authenticity may not be as high as 360 video, okay? Another thing to think about is often 6DOF training requires more hardware. Here is an example of the HTC Vive. You've got your headset, your controllers, your lighthouses, a cord that you have to plug into a computer. There are lots of other 6DOF devices out there, from the Oculus Rift to what HP has launched with the Reverb, and on and on, okay? The other thing you need with 6 degrees of freedom is you need space. So you need to actually set up a trackable area. Now, prior to devices like the Oculus Quest, which is an amazing piece of hardware. We're seeing this with, things that Pico will have down the road, and HTC has an untethered device, the Focus 2. Okay, so we are now seeing untethered 6th degree of freedom hardware, which is amazing and awesome for the future of this industry. But remember, you still need space for 6th degree of freedom experiences. And one of the things that we are seeing again and again is we get a lot of really excited tech-forward individuals that want the world, and they want what you're seeing on this screen right now. And then they kind of start to talk about the reality of, do I actually have space for 6th degree of freedom? What is the cost of 6th degree relative to 3 degree? Can I have 5 people in one room doing this at the same time? Or is the tracking going to interfere with each other? Are they going to bump into each other? And on and on, right? So when you start thinking through a lot of the logistics associated with 6th degree of freedom, typically customers realize, I don't really know if I want to start there. I'd rather start with 3 degree of freedom, where it's a little less expensive, it's easier to scale, it's largely rotational, right? And let me just master the basics before I move on to 6th degree of freedom, right? So that is how we think at Stryver. This is a large change management, seismic shift, digital transformation for your company. And we are very, very hesitant to just throw the kitchen sink at our customers and go for this right out of the gate. We take a crawl, walk, run approach, which is, hey, let's get the basics working at scale. Let's get the plumbing installed, literally and metaphorically. And then let's talk about where the bells and whistles are over time. And usually that's 3 degrees of freedom, an Oculus Go, for example, a Pico G2, and then eventually 6 degrees of freedom, your Quest, your Vive Focus Plus, etc. Right? So that is just generally how we think about 3 degrees of freedom versus real VR, which we can just call 6 degrees of freedom going forward. Now, really nice dovetail to another one that came in as it relates to scale, which I absolutely love. So we got a bunch of questions here. I'm just going to read them off because I'm going to bucket a lot of this into one kind of long-winded answer. Okay, so we've struggled adopting high-tech learning solutions because of our business changes so rapidly that we can't keep the learning up to date. I love the idea of VR, but is it sustainable? Can you tell us some of your most successful deployments at scale? How do you implement VR training on a big scale with high adoption? Are there bandwidth limitations for VR? Is there a change management strategy? Okay, et cetera, right? So absolutely love this question. Okay, and I've got another slide here that I just want to tee up that I want to use as an example, again, of how we engage with customers. But if you are not working with Stryver, guess what? I know there's a lot of Stryver's competitors on this webinar right now, and that's cool. I'm going to give you the playbook. Totally fine. We want everybody to win in this industry. Okay, so this is how we engage with our customers to set you up for success for doing this at scale. If you are a Fortune 1000 company, or even if you're not, if you're kind of the next rung down, but if you are anywhere from 10,000 employees to 500,000 employees, you're not going to do a learning solution in a vacuum. You need to do something that can eventually scale to the entire organization. So when we engage with a customer, from the first sales meeting, even to today with someone like Walmart, where we're 3.5 years in, right? We always have step one, strategy and alignment. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What is the ROI we're looking for? Where are we going to put these devices? Who's going to use it? When are they going to use it? What is the change management that's going to be required here? And on we go. Okay, so Stryver's approach, which I feel to be the right approach, but it's not necessarily for everybody, is this is not make some content, throw it on a headset, drop it off, good luck. That is not how we approach this thing while we're still very much in the early days. We take a very consultative approach up front. Okay, that information that we gather from you, someone asked about connectivity and bandwidth. wanting to know what's it going to take to get on your network. Where's the Wi-Fi really bad? Where is it really good? Should we be thinking about hard wiring, right? All of these things. Connectivity is a major, major challenge for the industry right now. Somebody asked about 5G. I can't wait for the world to go to 5G because it will be a major unlocker in many regards. But we do a lot of stuff up front with you before a contract's even signed, and definitely beyond as it relates to strategy. Because from our perspective, if you are thinking about scale, whether it's in a month, a year, or 3 years, you got to start thinking about that now. It doesn't just happen overnight. So that information informs what we're going to make from a curriculum design standpoint, the storyboards, the scripts, etc. That information informs the assets that we're going to get to build the learning experience. Here you see 360 video. That also may be CG. Okay, those assets then go into the experience build phase, where we use the authoring tool that we have built internally to make these modules. Then those modules go onto headsets. We do a setup and deployment phase where we literally run headsets through an assembly line at a warehouse that we have here in the Bay Area, and we ship them out. We do a rollout and adoption with our customers, train the trainer, launch day, etc., right? All of these things that you need to do from a change management perspective to make sure this works for you at scale. And then lastly, we're constantly doing performance analysis, data collection, post-pilot reviews, QBRs, etc., to make sure that the customer is getting what they had hoped for from a data and analytics perspective, right? And then when the customer says, I want to make more modules, I want to go to more locations, I want to do this, we literally do the whole thing again, right? And some customers don't need to do step 6, for example. One of these questions that was asked was about change management. Is this sustainable? Yes, it is. So Walmart is a great example. And a lot of people say, don't use Walmart. They're way bigger than me. As a matter of fact, Walmart is so big that they're actually an outlier because they are so much bigger than everybody else that it makes it harder to do this at scale. So they're actually a great example of how you can do this at scale. And they'll be the first to tell you that. So Walmart took rollout and adoption very seriously over the last 2 years. And as of today, it is sustainable. They have 4 headsets in every Walmart store in the United States. We push new modules via the cloud and via the software platform on a weekly, monthly basis. And then the new module shows up, and the associates that are supposed to do that for their training, do that for their training within the scheduled time that Walmart has built this into their routine. So if we take step 1 very seriously, doing this at scale, it will have some bumps in the road for sure. We'll have to get the kinks out operationally, but doing this at scale should not be something that should scare you. Okay, we will hold your hand every step of the way, and I would encourage all of you that are either doing this yourself or working with other vendors, if you are not doing some form of this end-to-end solution, you're probably not setting yourself up for success. So I'd strongly, strongly encourage you to take this, the philosophy behind this slide, if not the literal steps, very, very seriously. It's super, super important. Okay. Here's a question that came in that I think we can hit pretty quickly, and this person may not like the answer, so I apologize. I own a hardware store with less than 10 employees. How could I use VR or AR in my store to help train my employees? Would AR, VR be cost effective for me? So one of the things that we like to do at Stryver is offer no BS, honest, objective answers all the time. So this person who asked this, if you're more of a mom and pop and you are the business, your store and your 10 people, that is the business. You could certainly buy hardware and start to tinker with this stuff on your own. I would not recommend this as a viable solution today if you're going to pay a vendor or a partner. We're talking probably tens of thousands of dollars just to kind of get yourself off the ground from a content development, software, et cetera standpoint. For mom and pop stores out there, small businesses, I'm not necessarily sure that today is the right time to take this on unless you wanted to tinker with it yourself. Now, if you're a hardware store within a chain of 1,000 hardware stores, Ace Hardware, for example, I don't know how many they have, but just go with it as an example. And you're going to see a corporate investment in learning modules, software, analytics, et cetera, to do this at scale. And then maybe you as the 10-person store are only responsible for a piece of that, the hardware, for example. That is certainly viable because the corporation, the organization as a whole, is going to take this on as a centralized investment in learning for its employees. And then they may have certain costs such as hardware or maybe a software license annually go towards the individual stores. So that's kind of how I think about where we are today. And I certainly don't want that to be a negative answer, but I do want it to be the truth. This is not something that necessarily, outside of doing this on your own and tinkering, if you have those skills, it's not something that necessarily is ready for SMB. But if SMB is part of a larger organization, it can be a really, really nice fit. So I just wanted to address that one. Okay. How long is the process typically when working with a company on developing immersive training? Does consultation exist throughout the development process? All right, awesome. So great that I actually have this slide up and I did not go off of it. So typically, if you think about a lot of the work that might have gone, and this is for Stryver, this may not be the norm, just to be clear. If you think about all the work that goes into step one prior to the contract being signed, and then all the work that will continue in step one after the contract being signed and onward, typically from the time a contract is signed to headset on face. So basically the tail end of step one to step 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Usually that's about 3 months. So honestly, not that far off, for better or worse, from e-learning modules and other things that you may already be doing. Now, it can go a lot faster. We've done this in 7 weeks before. It's also gone a lot slower, 7 months. And full disclosure, the reason is often you, the customer. We find that when customers really, really have their act together and the approvals of scripts move quickly and they don't need to get, legal sign off on certain things they do, and they did a lot of work here in step one, and there's a strategy and a plan that they don't deviate from, and they don't want to make 50 rounds of edits over here in step 4, this can go pretty fast. We've done these in 7 to 8 weeks, even with first-time engagements. And then there's times where it's been 6, 7, 8 months when we see a lot of changing of mind, when we see lawyers getting involved, when we see challenges with internet connectivity, right? So I just want to be really honest with everybody. A lot of this will come down to what is going on in your organization. How are you structured to take this on? Is this like a rapid deployment, innovation arm of the company doing like a quick and dirty thing? Or is this something that a business unit is going to take on right from the beginning? One of the things that we suggest and recommend to combat this, to combat things taking longer, we actually recommend establishing a VR governance board from day one, where it's maybe 6 or 7 cross-functional people in your organization, an L&D leader, an HR leader, an operations leader, a finance leader, an IT leader, et cetera, right? So who are all, an executive sponsor. So who are all of the people that you're going to need to make decisions and that you're going to need to be the conduits to the rest of the organization, right? That really helps us move quickly, or more quickly, I should say, in the beginning. And then I can also tell you unequivocally, pilots don't go poorly. They usually go very, very well. And when companies start to do this at scale, and it's on CNBC, or it's in the New York Times, or it's on your own internal blog that you are doing VR at scale, everybody comes out of the woodwork because they want a piece of that. They want to be innovative. They want the time savings and cost savings. They want performance improvement, right? And we have seen that when a VR governance board is established from day one and you build that rhythm and that cadence, it is a huge, huge value add down the road when the whole company swarms to this thing and they want a piece of it. And if you don't, it can be a bit of a cluster, full disclosure. So we really recommend, taking step one very seriously. And that's content, that's ROI, that's hardware decisions, right? There's a lot of stuff here that we really, really emphasize building a plan for from day one. And again, if you're working with someone like us who has 22,000 headsets out in the field, we've kind of seen it all at this point. And we'll help you with those best practices based on what we've seen. So hopefully that's really helpful. I know I've come back to this theme again and again, and I can't emphasize enough about the need to plan and think about doing this at scale. Okay, I'm going to now go to the next bucket. We've got about 10 minutes remaining, and there's a lot here. Thank you for the engagement. We may have to do another one of these. Obviously, work from home is the solution to getting a ton of questions out from the world. So this is awesome. So a lot of questions about cost. What is the effort to create the content needed for the training? How should we think about budgeting? How long does it take to implement, which we already touched about? What is this going to cost at scale, et cetera, right? So you're going to be a little disappointed with this answer, but it's the truth. It depends, like many things in life, right? Now, I will give you some ballpark, realistic numbers for how to think about cost as it relates to testing, piloting, expanding at scale, okay? So if you just want to do something quick and dirty, and you want to get a basic piece of content made and you want to throw it on one headset and you want to show it to 20 people, you're probably looking at anywhere from free for somebody to get a logo on their website, a vendor, to $30,000 to $80,000 based on what you're actually building. Is it 360? Is it CG? Is that company willing to lose money versus make money to get your business, et cetera, right? So low end free, high end, maybe 80 to 100K for something kind of quick and dirty to prove that this works and to show the organization that you're doing something to investigate this, okay? Our pilots at Stryver taking this approach, okay, on average, maybe 200 grand, somewhere around there. So some are a little less, some are a little more based on what the customer wants and the scale to which we are what we're biting off from a scale perspective and a content perspective and a data perspective right away when you're doing your testing. And most of our pilots look to build 1, maybe 2 learning modules. They look to get, maybe 5 to 10 locations. They want to get maybe 200 to 500 people through training so they can get realistic data sets and build the momentum in the organization and get the kinks out, right? So our pilots tend to be a little larger because we're always thinking about scale, and that's what our customers want. Now, as you think about this on an ongoing basis, again, the answer is going to be, it depends, and there's going to be low end to high end. I certainly see a world, maybe even as soon as today, where there's probably 1 or 2 very generic, basic, off-the-shelf sexual harassment training in VR sitting in the Oculus store. And for the cost of the hardware and a couple $100, you could go take a look at those whenever you want, right? So there certainly is a low end of this, absolutely. So low end of doing this on an ongoing basis, maybe tens of thousands to low hundreds of thousands of dollars as it relates to the size of your organization, how many headsets you want, how much content you want to continue to have, et cetera. And then if you're a really, really large company and this is going to be one of the digital transformation things that you take on, this might be a couple $1 million, full disclosure. And that might be initially, X $100,000 in hardware and deployment and content build, et cetera. And then if you are a 50, 100, 300,000 person organization and you have thousands of headsets out there, well, just like phones and tablets and Microsoft Word on computers, there is a cost to deploy. There's an ongoing cost to maintain and support. There's a one-time cost to add more content, right? So there's a lot here. And if you're a large organization, you may be paying, a couple $1 million a year to keep the lights on. But remember, you are not going to even entertain paying that if you didn't see the ROI that you thought you were going to see when you kick this thing off. So back to time savings and cost savings, I can unequivocally tell you that Stryver is not working with anyone at scale, and there are a couple dozen at this point, that have not done the math equation on the ROI that they're going to see, from X time saved to Y hours, Z time, A number of flights, B number of in-person sessions, right? All these things that go into the money that you spend on people development, those math problems have been done. And then when you get your base case of ROI with your first and second learning module, then when our customers say, oh my God, every learning module I make going forward is going to stack ROI on top of this. So I'm going to make numbers up, but they're not crazy necessarily. I may spend 500 grand rolling out a couple thousand headsets. I may be spending $2 million a year to keep the lights on, just like I do with Workday and Cornerstone and all of these other software products, right? I may be doing that to make this a learning solution that I'm taking on its scale. But with my first 3 modules, I saw a 3x ROI. I got $5, $8, $10 million back on my first 3. And now with modules 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, oh my goodness, over time, I may be getting 5, 10, 20x as I'm adding more modules and use cases into the platform, right? So that's typically how we really push customers to think. And full transparency, we've had some customers take a proposal to the CFO, and the CFO goes, wait, I can't do this if it's just break even in year 1. And then they say, all right, Derek, how can I help him or her with what's in year 2, 3, 4? And then as soon as we say, all right, every module you're going to add once you've laid the plumbing is going to be more ROI for you, that is something that the lights come on very quickly, and it's a very easy sell, right? So I think that's super important, and I'm glad that those folks asked those questions about cost. Okay, let's go to some other ones here. We've got 3 minutes left. Oh, I like this. Someone's paying attention to the slide. Wonderful. What's your process for step 2 and 3? Meaning, do you have internal tech writers, e-learning devs, narrator talent, etc.? Great question. So our content team is actually more of a learning team. Learning theorists, data scientists, instructional designers, etc. So most of what's going to happen in step 2 is going to be the making of storyboards, writing of scripts, mapping to data that you would typically see in some of these roles that you listed that are already kind of industry standard, right? And then step 3, we have some people in-house as well as a network that we go to for narrators, actors, pre-production, post-production. You know, we're doing some 3D modeling in-house as well as using some really awesome outsource shops just so we can kind of flex up and flex down based on need. So we have a lot of in-house expertise in these areas, and then we've also built a partner network in these areas. And our vision for the future is that we will actually give you, the customer or the partner, we will give you the playbook for step 2, 3, and 4. We'll give you the software, we'll give you the tools, and we'll give you the playbook so you can do this yourself. Okay, our motto is we will do it for you so you don't fail. We will do it with you to start to teach you, and then eventually you will do it yourself. And do it yourself may be literally doing the whole thing end to end. Steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Do it yourself may be you go to the ecosystem of vendors out there like you're currently doing with 2D training, and Stryver's platform and tools are just part of that. So that's how we think about that. Okay, I'm going to do one more, and then we'll wind it down. Hit on a lot of the ones that were submitted ahead of time, so thank you for those. How do you approach partnership, dev, and sales in an industry that requires so much education up front? Long story short, you're seeing it right now. So conferences, webinars, these slides, etc. We have a very large travel budget because you need to get headsets on people's faces in order to make this a reality and show them what it is. You can't just do a web demo necessarily. Like I said, we take step 1 very seriously. And, you know, as you guys are thinking through the customers out there that are the end users, we got to be really honest at a time like this. This is going to be a challenging economic environment for the next 12, 18, 24 months. And if you're doing this on your own, or you're working with a vendor that only has 4 or 5 people in their company, it's going to be really difficult for smaller companies to be able to raise money, to stay in business, to be able to make money. to stay in business, to be able to travel to you, to do the work required, right? So Stryver isn't the only one for sure that is well capitalized, but it is something that I think we all need to be really upfront about with each other. And this is ready today. This technology is viable and it is ready today. And if you're a company from Fortune 1000 on down looking to do this, I would really encourage you to do your homework and pick a partner that you know is going to be around for the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months and beyond. We get a lot of phone calls to this day from companies that say, hey, I tried to do this myself and it went well, but I can't scale it. Can you help? And I'd love for you to help with this cleanup job. How can you help me scale this? How can you clean this up? So that does happen. I just want to be really honest with everybody. And, again, our approach is to take this 7-step process very seriously, whether it is with Stryver, whether it's internally, or whether it's with another vendor. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We are at time. Thank you so much for the engagement. We had dozens of questions submitted ahead of time. We had another 2 or 3 dozen questions submitted in real time. We will look to do another one of these. We will bank these questions for the next one. We will also put these on our website. We'll blog about them, etc. I hope everybody found this really valuable. Thank you for your time and engagement. And again, I just want to remind everybody, this is not necessarily about us. I hope I didn't go overboard on the Stryver side, but we do have a formula that is working right now. So I would encourage you to obviously think about us in a lot of these situations, but also just think about the thought leadership and the formula that we've laid out today. And if you're not going to work with us, that is cool. We want you to succeed and we want you to do this right. So please take the information today and use it to make it great going forward. Thank you to everybody and have a wonderful day and stay safe. And we will talk to all of you soon, hopefully. Bye.